Every country has its myths. Some build them out of stories. Some build them out of monuments. The United States built one out of concrete, steel, and gold. In the hills of Kentucky, behind barbed wire, electric fences, armed guards, and layers of secrecy, sits one of the most secure buildings on Earth, the United States Bullion Depository. You know it by a simpler name, Fort Knox. You've heard the phrase your whole life. Locked up like Fort Knox. It's become shorthand for absolute security, impenetrable defenses, untouchable wealth, a place so protected that the idea of breaking in feels like a joke. But here's the paradox. The dollar is no longer backed by gold. You can't walk into a bank and redeem paper for metal. The United States tells the world you don't need gold for a modern economy to function. Central bankers talk about interest rates, digital payments, and complex models, not bars of metal in a vault. So if gold is supposedly obsolete, why does one of the most powerful nations on Earth still guard a pile of yellow metal in the middle of Kentucky like it is the heart of its power? What's actually inside Fort Knox? And in a world of digits, on screens, derivatives, and algorithmic trading, why does it still matter? On paper, Fort Knox is just a vault that stores metal. In reality, it's something much more important. It's a monument to a world we supposedly left behind, and an insurance policy for a world we haven't met yet. The gold at Fort Knox isn't just metal. It's a memory. It's leverage. It's a silent message to every other government, investor, and central bank on Earth about who still controls what when everything gets tested. To understand what really sits behind those granite walls and why it still matters to your life, your savings, and your future, you don't start in Kentucky. You start in a crisis. In the early 1930s, the global financial system was falling apart. The Great Depression had gutted economies. Banks were failing by the thousands. Currencies were under attack. People didn't trust paper money, so they did what humans have done for thousands of years when trust disappears. They ran to gold. Under the old gold standard, dollars were legally redeemable for gold. That sounded reassuring until too many people tried to cash in their promises at once. If too many citizens walked into banks and demanded gold, the system would break. The government would run out of metal, and the currency would implode. So Washington did something radical. In 1933, the U.S. government made it illegal for citizens to own most forms of monetary gold. People were ordered to turn in their gold coins and bullion to the Federal Reserve and the Treasury in exchange for paper dollars. The penalty for refusing wasn't a polite letter, it was fines and prison. Once the gold was in federal hands and the public had accepted the deal, the government changed the rules of the game. It raised the official price of gold. Overnight, the United States captured a massive windfall. It had taken gold from citizens at one price, then marked that gold up on its own books. Gold flowed in from the public. Gold flowed in from abroad, from nations that trusted the U.S. more than their own collapsing systems. Suddenly, the United States held one of the largest piles of monetary gold in human history. Those mountains of metal needed a home, not just any home, a fortress. The U.S. Army already had a base in Kentucky. The site was chosen for its isolation, its security, and its distance from the coasts. It was hard to reach, hard to attack, and easy to defend. Exactly what you want when you're planning to store a large share of the world and real money. By the late 1930s, out of that base rose a new building. Thick granite walls, reinforced steel, layers of fences and patrols, a vault so heavily protected it bordered on obsessive. Inside was a central chamber, surrounded by smaller compartments, all locked, layered, and controlled. The United States wasn't just building a warehouse, it was building a temple to the gold standard. So what's actually inside Fort Knox? Officially, it holds a massive share of America's gold reserves, hundreds of millions of ounces, in the form of heavy bars stacked on steel racks, row after row, layer after layer. Most of those bars don't look like anything from a jewelry store. They're dull, brick-like ingots, scarred, rough, and stamped with weight and purity. Some were melted down from old coins. Others came from foreign central banks. Many have been there for decades, untouched. Over the years, Fort Knox has temporarily hosted other treasures. Original copies of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence during World War II, for example, and other sensitive artifacts moved there for safekeeping. Just the belief that the United States would remain stable, powerful, and dominant. Fort Knox remained full of gold, but officially, that gold did not back the dollar anymore. So again, the question, if gold no longer defines the currency, why keep it? On the surface, gold doesn't matter to the dollar. The dollar floats. It trades based on interest rates, capital flows, trade balances, and politics. Central bankers talk about inflation expectations and yield curves, not bar counts. But beneath that surface, gold still plays three crucial roles, and Fort Knox sits at the center of all three. First, gold is psychological. In a crisis, people don't run to spreadsheets. They run to symbols. A nation with no gold looks desperate. A nation with large reserves looks prepared. When investors, foreign governments, and central banks look at the United States, they don't just see GDP numbers and stock indices. They also see a deep reservoir of metal that could, in theory, be mobilized in an emergency. The gold in Fort Knox is a quiet signal that says, we still have something real. Second, gold is geopolitical. Central banks around the world still hold gold. They buy it, sell it, and move it between vaults in New York, London, Zurich, and elsewhere. They do this for a simple reason. Gold is the one type of monetary asset that is not someone else's liability. But those were visitors. The permanent residents are the bars. And those bars are only half the story. Because gold in Fort Knox doesn't really matter as metal. It matters as what it represents. During the age of the gold standard, every bar in that vault was a silent guarantee behind the US dollar. Not a promise to you or me directly. You couldn't walk up to the gate and ask for your paycheck in gold, but a promise to other governments and central banks. If they held dollars, they could trade them for gold at a fixed rate. That's what made the system work. After World War II, that promise became the backbone of the global order. Europe was shattered. Factories were rubble. Gold reserves had been drained to pay for war. The United States, protected by oceans and packed with industry, emerged with enormous productive capacity and an ocean of gold sitting in vaults like Fort Knox. In 1944, delegates gathered at Bretton Woods to design a new financial system. The arrangement was deceptively simple. Other countries would peg their currencies to the US dollar. The US dollar would be pegged to gold. If you were a foreign government and you held dollars, you could send them to the United States and receive gold at a fixed price. That made the dollar more than just paper. It was a claim, indirect but real, on the metal locked away in Kentucky and a handful of other vaults. When a French banker or a German central banker looked at a stack of dollars, they weren't just seeing ink and cotton. They were seeing a slice of Fort Knox. The bars in Kentucky were no longer just American wealth. They were the foundation of a global financial empire. Fort Knox became more than a building. It became a symbol of trust. But trust is fragile. As the decades passed, the United States spent more, borrowed more, and printed more dollars than the system could comfortably support. Wars in Korea and Vietnam, expanding social programs, foreign aid, global military presence, dollars poured out across the world. Other countries did the math. They saw more and more dollars in circulation, and the amount of gold in vaults staying roughly the same, or shrinking. If there were more dollar claims than gold backing them, what happened if too many people tried to cash in their chips at once? Some governments didn't wait to find out. They quietly shipped dollars back to the United States and demanded gold. Slowly, steadily, metal flowed out of Fort Knox and other depositories and across the ocean. The vaults didn't empty, but the trend was clear. Trust was eroding. By the early 1970s, the U.S. faced a choice. Keep losing gold until its reserves were fatally weakened, or break the promise that had anchored the system since Bretton Woods. In 1971, the decision came. The United States suspended the convertibility of dollars into gold. Foreign governments could no longer trade paper for metal. The legal tie between the dollar and the gold in Fort Knox was severed. For the first time in modern history, the world's reserve currency was just paper and faith. No promised gold backing, no final line in the sand. Bonds are promises, bank deposits are promises, even paper currency is a promise. Gold is just gold. If relationships sour, if sanctions tighten, if financial warfare escalates, physical gold becomes a way for nations to store wealth outside the direct control of any single government or banking system. The United States holding a massive pile of gold on its own soil under its own military protection is not an accident. It's leverage. In any extreme scenario where trust in fiat currencies breaks down and a new system has to be negotiated, the players with the most real metal on the table will have a louder voice when the rules get rewritten. Third, gold is accounting. Even in a world of fiat money, central banks and treasuries list gold among their reserves. It shows up on balance sheets at official values, often far below market price, but still undeniably there. That means the gold at Fort Knox quietly supports the perceived health of the U.S. financial position. It's an asset that doesn't default, doesn't file for bankruptcy, and doesn't blow up in a derivatives crisis. It just sits there, inert, waiting. In that sense, the gold in Fort Knox is like a fire extinguisher in a building. Most of the time, nobody notices it. Nobody cares how it works until the smoke starts. But where there is secrecy, there is doubt. Fort Knox has been inspected, but not in the kind of full, transparent spectacle that suspicious minds want. Over the years, officials have weighed and tested sample bars. Auditors have checked seals and ledgers. Members of Congress and selected journalists have been given brief, tightly controlled tours. They've seen rows of bars. They've taken photos. They've signed visitor logs. What has never happened is a complete, independent, bar-by-bar audit broadcast in real time for the entire world to watch. That gap between what people want to see and what they are allowed to see, is where conspiracy theories grow. Some claim the vault is empty, that the gold was shipped out or sold off long ago. Others insist the bars are still there physically, but have been leased and rehypothecated, pledged multiple times, and hidden financial deals. In that story, the same bar of gold has more than one owner, at least on paper. Maybe some of that is true, maybe none of it is. What matters more is what those suspicions reveal. They reveal how much our financial system rests on something that can be stored in a vault at all. Belief. Belief that the money in your bank account exists and can be withdrawn. Belief that the bonds in your pension will be paid in full and on time. Belief that the numbers governments report about debts and reserves are accurate, or at least close enough. Fort Knox is a mirror of that belief. If everyone trusted the system absolutely, no one would care what was inside. The fact that so many people obsess over those vaults tells you more about the state of global trust than any official statement. So why does Fort Knox matter to you? You don't have a key. You will never walk down those corridors. You're not redeeming your paycheck for a bar stamped U.S. Mint. All it. But the logic behind Fort Knox is the same logic that will decide who gets wiped out and who survives in the next major financial shock. When systems are stable, paper promises feel safe. Bank accounts, pension funds, government bonds, life insurance policies, they all feel solid. Digital balances look real. Numbers don't shake in your hand the way gold coins do. In those calm periods, a place like Fort Knox feels like nostalgia. An old monument to a time when money had to be backed by something tangible, when governments couldn't create currency with a keyboard. But when trust cracks, when inflation erodes purchasing power faster than wages rise, when banks start to wobble, when governments borrow far beyond what they can realistically repay, people rediscover the same simple truths that shaped the 1930s. Paper is easy to create. Trust is easy to lose. Real things are hard to fake. The gold in Fort Knox is one of those real things. You don't need a personal fortress to learn from it. History shows that people who come through monetary upheaval in decent shape tend to do the same few things. They don't rely on a single promise. They keep some form of tangible value. They hold at least part of their wealth outside the most fragile parts of the system. And they pay attention to what governments do with their own reserves, not just what they say to the public. Ask yourself a simple question. If gold were truly obsolete, if it were nothing but a barbaric relic with no real role in modern finance, why do the most powerful governments on Earth still hoard it? Why did they build Fort Knox? Why do nations quietly add to their gold reserves whenever geopolitical tensions rise or confidence in the global order weakens? They are not sentimental. They are not romantic treasure collectors. They are hedging against their own system. In the end, Fort Knox is three things at once. It is theater, a stage of granite and steel sending a constant message about American strength without a single word spoken. It is insurance, a deep reserve of unchanging value that can be used, pledged, or revalued behind closed doors if the financial system ever needs a hard reset. And it is a reminder, a physical monument to a forgotten truth, that the entire modern financial system, trillions in digits, contracts, and derivatives, still rests on something very old and very human. The need for trust. The building in Kentucky will probably never face a commando raid or a Hollywood-style heist. The vault door will probably never swing open to hand out bars in a panic. Most days, nothing happens there at all. And yet, its existence whispers a quiet warning. If the people who design the system keep a stash of real money in a fortress, maybe you shouldn't keep all of yours in places that can be frozen, inflated away, or rearranged with a keystroke. Every empire believes its promises will last. Every government insists its money is safe. History disagrees. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'll show you where to look.